Hi everyone, this is Anand from Amoeboids, and today we have Rachel Wright with us to talk about release management in Jira. Rachel is a well-known expert in the Atlassian ecosystem. She has written some amazing books about Jira administration. She does a consulting business to help teams extract maximum value from the Atlassian tools and is a prominent speaker at the industry events. So, welcome, Rachel. It's so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to talk to people about release management and maybe share some stories and help some people out as well along the way.
Awesome. I cannot wait to jump right in. All right. So before I really, talk about the release management stuff, let me give you a little bit of background around why we are doing this, right? So I'm sure you've heard about our app, Automated Release Notes for Jira, right? So release management is kind of one area that we really love to play around with. We think how the frequency of releases definitely correlates with the agility that you have in your culture, in your processes, right? So we wanted to understand from different
Absolutely.
perspectives what the release management process looks like at different organizations, right? And you being an expert in Jira administration, we wanted to take your side of the story as well, right? So let's jump right in. So how do you look at the release management process in Jira from the point of view of a Jira administrator? Any specific patterns that you see how release managers use the versions feature in Jira? Do you think the release management capabilities of Jira are being fully utilized?
Well, so let me give you a little bit of background. So before I was a Jira administrator, I was a web developer. So I have lived for development lifecycle, and I definitely understand the great things about it and the pains about it. And I'll tell you, I've gone from no process whatsoever to a huge rigid process that was almost overburdened, over customized, and everything in the middle. So it's exciting to have tools like Jira and like automated release notes for Jira to make it easier. Anything you can do to take some work off the hands of the development team, all the manual work is always so helpful, and developers appreciate it, QA appreciates it, and leadership has more insight into what the heck we're doing when we're sitting in the dark with our keyboards and furiously typing and creating new code.
Right. So, have you seen any patterns surrounding how the release managers tend to utilize the versions feature in Jira?
Certainly. Well, it depends on the type of company that you work with, but I can say that some companies absolutely have no process at all,
Right.
no standards. They use the features in Jira differently, or they don't even use them at all.
Right.
So my advice to other Jira administrators is before you start configuring how you're going to manage your releases in Jira, configure it outside of Jira first and make sure you have a sound process there. And then never build anything in Jira until you've considered the end goal in mind. What do you want to get out of Jira? What are your reporting requirements? Because that should dictate how you configure Jira. That should dictate how you use Jira. You should be able to use your own processes. Don't think that you have to change your process to fit Jira. It should be the other way around.
Amazing. So that's kind of really interesting advice as far as I see it. So you're saying before you, as a Jira administrator, before you jump right in and start configuring Jira for release management, maybe jot down the process, create a flow chart, something on those lines, and then think about how you can implement that process inside of Jira. Did I get that right?
Right. Absolutely. So many people just jump right in and start customizing, and then they find 5 years down the road that, oh, everybody's using a different format for the release version, or nobody's using the same terminology, or little things like that just make your life so much harder and harder to communicate.
That's true. That's very, very true. Now, what's the most complex setup that you have seen in terms of a release management process that was implemented in Jira in as part of your consulting career?
Oh, I have a horror story. So when I was a web development manager, we had 3 releases running in parallel. We had a weekly release, a major release every month, and then another release quarterly. And everyone was working on every release at the same time. And it was absolutely impossible to understand what you were doing, when it was due. We ended up saying, okay, these team members are going to work on the weekly, and these team members are going to work on the monthly, and then we'll switch in a quarter. And then, because the pressure is always on the weekly people because they have the least amount of time,
Right.
and they have a ton of projects. So that helped a little bit, but honestly, it was my job to keep track of all this, and I had trouble tracking it, even though we had a great tool like Jira. It's just, wait a minute, which thing am I working on? Which thing am I checking on? It was impossible. So as much as you can affect your release cycle, that would be helpful, not to go that route and not to do too many concurrent releases at once. I know there's emergencies, there's always going to be emergencies, but just set yourself up for success and don't try to do too much at the same time. It doesn't work out well always.
Well, that's really incredible. So, help me understand what was the part of these weekly, monthly, and quarterly releases. I mean, how did you distribute what goes into the weekly release, what goes into the monthly release, and what goes into the quarterly release?
It was usually based on scope of the project or scope of the change. So we tended to do like the smaller, quick changes in the weekly, and then we would build new products or build new product pages on the website for the monthly, and then strategic initiatives for the company went into the quarterly. But it was just, and as crazy as it was for the development team and the QA team, like the business team couldn't keep up either. Like they were constantly asking me, which release is this going into, and when are we going to have this done? I mean, even with wonderful power of JQL, like it was just so hard to keep track, to remember, to pick the right version, to check the code into the right version. Like I don't think I'll ever recommend doing it that way. I'm glad but I wouldn't do it that way again.
Amazing, amazing. So, based off that experience, right, and the experience that came afterwards while you were consulting, do you have any best practices in mind? Anything that you think teams should really do to ensure continuity in terms of the release management, efficiency, and quality as well?
Absolutely. I have a lot of tips. And the first one is to start upstream from the release management process, because you've probably heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
To ensure like release, if your process is more linear or cyclical, release is kind of at the end, and sometimes it's totally forgotten about. But all the work you do before the release part will create a better product, right? Create a better release experience, maybe less bugs get into production. So don't forget to focus on improving things at the beginning of the process. Also, communication is huge. A lot of companies I work with never publish release notes. They just hope that their product managers are going to go into Jira and create a dashboard and keep up with them. And we know that that's not always how people work. So it's important to have ways to communicate to them progress along the way, and then what you actually released. And a lot of people forget that you have many audiences in this part, right? Some people think that release notes are just for developers or just for customers, but the key is to publish the right amount of information for the audience. So, developers want a certain amount of information about what changed in their application so they don't step over those changes and hurt them. project managers want a different level of detail. Business owners want to know what features they got this release. And of course, customers want to know, what's going to change in my system? What bugs did you fix? Did you fix the bug I reported that I've been waiting on all this time? So it's a different amount of information, and it's kind of an art to communicate the right thing at the right time.
Right, right. That is so true. Next thing that I wanted to understand from you, right now, typically Jira and Confluence are sort of majority of the teams do utilize both of them together. Now, within the context of release management, how do you think Confluence should be utilized?
Yeah, if you have it, it's such a helpful integration to have. I use it in two places for my software development lifecycle. So I use it in the beginning for planning, put all the requirements into Confluence, and then automatically create Jira issues from your table of requirements. And then I use it again at the end for retrospectives and for publishing release notes for internal and external audiences. For me, it's just easier to manage information. I like to track process in Jira and then information in Confluence.
Well, awesome. So you're saying you not only keep the internal documentation within Confluence, but you also have customer facing documentation, maybe release notes or even the documentation that's accessible outside to the outside customers, to the outside users.
Right. And I don't have it today because obviously my role today isn't software development. I'm not writing code, and that's a good thing probably. But yeah, before I went from absolutely no process at all, like literally just downloading a file, making the changes, uploading the file and testing it. That's not a process. There's no versioning. There's no, good sound quality. It's very, very dangerous. So I went from absolutely no process at all to a good process, and then kind of what I would call an over customized and over automated process. So I've kind of done them all. But yeah, I would definitely recommend different levels of information for different audiences.
Amazing, amazing. And do you see some kind of automation coming into picture here? Because DevOps is kind of extremely hot these days, right? You've got a bunch of different integrations, a bunch of different tool chains coming together. So how do you see the impact of these DevOps tools on the overall release management process, as well as integration with Jira and Confluence?
Well, so it was interesting when I first used Jira and Confluence, they were integrated and used together, but none of the other development tools were. So later in my software career, we connected Bitbucket, and that just opened up an amazing potential for connection and integration and sharing information and automation. There's a lot of same words in that sentence, but really it was amazing to see that, like now Jira can look for failed builds, or now Jira can warn me of certain things. Oh, I forgot to check in that code, or so Jira has that release hub, and it talks to Bitbucket so well, and that's so helpful. I mean, I always tell people when you can integrate your tools, the whole process flows so much easier. Just make sure you're not duplicating information in one tool. And so I'll give you an example. I worked with a company that named their versions in Jira major.minor.patch. So like 1.1.1. And then in their other tools, they named it differently. So like 1.0 release. And I'm like, wait a minute. How are you tying that data together? And, they're not. So that's a super powerful integration point in Jira. If you name your issue key the same as your same as the commit note, that's going to tie that information together. And that just makes life so much easier. You have traceability, and then you can use all those great features in the tools. I see so many companies like creating custom fields for versions. And I'm just like, wait a minute, if you've created a custom field, then you don't get to take advantage of any of the reporting, releasing the versions in Jira, querying using the functions. Like they're just missing out on so many things with just some small changes that they've decided to make.
Exactly. This topic reminds me of one of the recent features. It's not actually very recent. I think it came back about 5 6 months ago in Jira, which is due to the Bitbucket pipelines. You can actually see timeline of deployment. So whenever a certain issue went into X environment, Y environment, Z environment, you can actually see the timeline of that events. And the first time we saw it, we were really amazed. It's just amazing from a product manager's point of view how you can easily spot when a specific story went into QA, when it went to production, and so on. It just gives you a visual clue about how frequently the items are moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. And the more visibility you have, you can make your decisions based on data instead of based on a feeling, right?
Right.
You can make business decisions much quicker and smarter that way.
Exactly. Another, probably this question may sound a little repetitive, but I wanted to understand the complexity involved when you have, cross project releases, right? So how do you track them inside of Jira? Now, there are a bunch of different apps that are out there, but what is it that you think that makes that process specifically complex?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, Jira doesn't natively support it, right?
Right.
So people have come up with all sorts of like workarounds and hacks and great apps in the marketplace to solve that problem. I've seen people try to use an Epic and link issues from other projects to it, and that's a way you can do it. It's not my favorite way because it kind of messes with your reporting.
Right.
Your charts aren't going to display the information correctly that you need to understand the velocity and burn down and all that stuff. What else have people done? I've seen them use like boards, a million boards to combine issues. And if you've ever tried to have a board with queries for multiple projects, there are challenges there, especially with permissions. Like all of a sudden, everybody loses the ability to like create a sprint or manage a sprint. So that's challenging. So I think the way I would handle it is probably a marketplace app, something to help me with portfolio or road mapping or even just project management. I think there's a great opportunity to kind of extend what we love about Jira and make it more flexible for teams that work that way.
True. So, do you have any specific app in mind? I mean, I know for one, there is advanced roadmap from Atlassian themselves, right? So, have you seen that in action where it was used to its full potential and the cross project releases were managed totally efficiently?
Not yet. I wish I could say, here's a great example, but everybody is kind of struggling with it, to be honest. And I don't think that's anything Jira related. I think that's more, process related, and software development is complex and there are lots of challenges, and all of us kind of have the same challenges, and we solve them differently, and we have a different journey through our software development life cycle. And I have yet to see the perfect solution. I've also yet to see a company that uses Agile in the way that I think Agile was intended. I've seen a lot of like hybrid attempts. Sometimes I call it Wagile. Sometimes I call it hopelessly waterfall because they think they're agile and they're really waterfall. So there's like still so much to learn in this industry. I mean, I still learn things all the time, and that makes it interesting for me. And it's great to see what other companies are doing and then like pick and choose the best things from each of them and then try to infuse that into my process or to help the next customer make theirs just a little better.
So true. Now coming towards the communication aspect of release management, you already touched upon it before, right? So, I mean, as far as I see it, there are multiple different stakeholders involved. It's not only about your customers, right? The release management process, although once the upgrade is released, once the new feature is released, it's obviously about communicating that to the customers. But before that happens, you got a bunch of other stakeholders as well. Although they are internal, teams typically do not, treat them as stakeholders in the release management process, right? And in our opinion, they should also be the part of the entire spectrum that we call the release management process, and they should be part of the entire communication as well, right? And that involves the individual developers, the Scrum team, in fact, even the business people as well, who are not directly related or directly interested in the feature that's going live, but rather the business impact. In our case, we even treat the support team as the part of release management process, because once the new feature is live, the support team needs to ensure that customers who are asking questions related to that functionality are getting the relevant answers and the up-to-date answers, right? So in that context, what are the various ways that you have seen your customers create and communicate release notes to these different stakeholders, if at all you have seen teams do that to all of the stakeholders, not just customers?
So there's like a range of spectrums here, right? A lot of companies do nothing at all, right? Kind of like what I said earlier is they expect their project managers to go write a complex JQL query and find what they did and try to decipher what they did and try to read development notes to figure out what changed. And that's not a very helpful option. And it's certainly not a very proactive option. And there's so many different audiences. I think the key is communication throughout the whole process and engage the whole team throughout the process. Like, it should never be like, oh, I'm done with my dev work. Now I'm going to throw out all that code over to QA and that's it. My job is done. I think it needs to be a more holistic process. And I think that you need to make the right level of information available to the right people. So like, a product owner doesn't care, what the query was you changed in your SQL database, right? They don't need that. They need to understand what is the impact customer and what are people going to be calling me about when this feature launches in production. Or I'll give you an example. A lot of times, like you said, customer service gets neglected, right? You launch a feature, you come back on Monday morning, and all of a sudden there's 1,000 support tickets because, there's something wrong or something unexpected, and customer service wasn't equipped with enough information and information ahead of time to prepare for the questions that might come in. Or the legal team. I see the legal team neglected a lot.
Right.
You'll launch something new on the website, for example, and well, shoot, they got to change the terms and conditions, or they have to write some new disclaimers, or who knows what. And they only know that something launched. They don't know the details, and they weren't brought in at the beginning of the process. So they're behind the game, right? And there's a scramble to write an emergency disclaimer or something like. I've seen that a lot. So the key is good project management, people understanding how to use the tools that are available, and then everyone using the same terminology and the similar processes. That helps too.
Right. I mean, that pretty much sums up the background of, or rather the origin of automated release notes, So I used to be a product person in my last corporate job, right? And one of my responsibilities was communicating the release notes to different stakeholders. Now, in an ideal world, you would want to communicate different content to different people, right? Like you said, not everyone needs to know about everything that goes into the release. Everyone has different concerns, different ideas, and different, let's say, aspirations as far as even the product is concerned, what it should be doing for them. So, I mean, I was spending at least 2 days behind every release just to create those communications. And despite spending those 2 days, I did not have, the segmented content. It more or less, it used to be the same content that went out almost to everyone, which was, I mean, for a checkbox, I was doing my job. That's okay. But in terms of the engagement that it was supposed to get, it wasn't getting it. right? So that's where I think the power of segmentation comes in, and this really gels in well when you have custom fields in Jira to segment release notes. The automated release notes function relies on JQL heavily.
Mhm.
And as soon as you have these different personas created within Jira issues through custom fields, you can generate those different release notes, and essentially with a single click, or if you have it thoroughly automated without any clicks, you end up generating n number of variations for these different personas. It's quite amazing what JQL it's quite amazing what JQL can do for you.
Yeah, I was going to say that saves so much time because it's so tedious and it's a thankless job. And I mean, that Jira does have a built-in release notes tool, but it's very simplistic, right? Like it's not cross-project. All it does is really spit out a list of issues for you to copy and paste somewhere else. And I think there's only like 2 formats you can use.
Right.
So it's a start, but it's not an easy way to do it. And so it's great that folks like you have created something to take that manual labor that we all hate out of the equation, and also give us a way to publish it differently. Like a lot of people I know do it in a spreadsheet, or they do it, on a whiteboard in the kitchen, or it's not really maintainable, or it's hidden in email, right? That's my favorite, when everybody says, oh, but I emailed it to you. Well, I can't find an email from that long ago, right? I need a repository that's, searchable, sortable, and not buried in my messages for the day. So that's exciting that you have something to help with all of this.
So it's good that you actually brought up the topic of Jira's default release notes feature, right? Right now, all it does is it gives you, I think, issue key and summary that you can copy and paste somewhere else, right? As a way to give back something to the community, we have created the free version of automated release notes, right? And it's obviously it's only available for the cloud version, given that Atlassian is pushing in that direction. So if there is anyone who is not happy with the default feature that comes out of Jira, right, you can definitely install the free version of the app, and it will definitely do better than the what default feature offers.
Great.
Awesome.
So I did have a question for you. I think people would be interested to know what's your advice about how to protect sensitive information from ending up in your release notes, say publicly, versus the release notes you publish privately.
True. And this is again, I mean, this comes back to the same idea about JQL. Even we have these different segments where we generate release notes for different stakeholders. And one part of that equation is taking into account sensitive data. Obviously, you don't want to expose, maybe the development related information to the outside world. It does not make any sense. So usually what we suggest is create custom fields, create personas inside of your Jira issues, and accordingly map the release notes to those personas. Eventually, what you would end up doing is you would utilize a certain JQL for a specific persona that will generate the release notes content. And that really helps in the long term. Again, at the end of the day, no tool is going to save you if your processes are not clean and streamlined, right? So if you do not review your release notes content before they are published, there are going to be points of failure down the line, right? So obviously having a streamlined process in place is probably the most important thing. Once that's there, whether you're doing it through automated release notes or via some embedded macros in Confluence, that's a completely different part. But having a streamlined process is probably the most important part here.
I love your idea about personas. We do so much work about personas for our own customers, right? Like understanding what our customer needs and their different, attributes, but we don't do it internally. And we really should. That's such a great piece of advice. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. I think, Rachel, that was really, really insightful. all the stuff that you shared with us about release management, specifically within the context of Jira. And I hope all of our audiences are going to find it useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.